This is our guest, Junius WIlliams. I'll give an introduction to the class and the logic that brought this man onto campus for this class visit. Junius, I'm in the humanities department here at NJIT, and the focus of this class is the literature of Newark, and that's Philip Roth and Amiri Baraka, your good self. And the reason why I constructed this course beginning a year ago was that I found that there was a fundamental disconnect between many students, even faculty that I knew, with the actual city where they are matriculated to become magnificent engineers and superstars, you know, later on in life. And so, I don't know, I don't want to take up too much time, but anyway, it was both the possibility of having a kind of mutual enlightenment, learning along with my students, getting a firmer grasp of the city in a kind of literary and aesthetic track, but also the metaphysics of urban psychology, history, activism, trying to, again, replenish our sense of place and sites of possibility like Newark. So I'm not going to put any pressure on my students, but they are all scholars of Junius WIlliams because they have gone through this formidable book, Unfinished Agenda, Urban Politics in the Era of Black Power. Junius WIlliams is a wonderful writer, historian, chronicler, but he's also been a lawyer and an activist. And I often, even among my peers, when it comes to politics rears its shapely head only presidentially, every 4 years. And there doesn't seem to be a sense of grassroots community activism, the long haul or the short take. So anyway, I don't want to monopolize this class session with Junius. I can definitely start the cliched ball rolling with some questions of my own, but if anyone like Tigger is just ready to pounce with some questions or insights, that would be wonderful. Oh yes, please. Okay, then I will start. Oh, Teresa, yes.
Hi, Mr. Williams. I'm also on faculty here. My name is Teresa. I'm a budding social movement scholar, and I'm reading and rereading your memoir, and I think the publisher presents it as sort of a handbook, in a sense, for people in the current generation of social justice movements, like the Occupy movement, for example. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the leadership structures in activist movements from a few decades ago, because one of the observations people make about contemporary social movements and youth movements especially is they're sort of leaderless, that they have a very kind of nebulous way of organizing. And this is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on who, it's a democratic thing or it's a problem, depending on who's talking. But I wonder if you have any opinions about that, or you can talk about sort of your experience with like leadership in some of the movements you've been affiliated with for justice and democracy.
Okay. Did everyone hear the question? All right. First of all, let me say that I'm happy to be here. I want to thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having them read the book. You know far more about me than I know about you. And I may ask you some questions about yourself, kind of to equal the playing field. Because you know all the stuff I gave you, and I told it all, well, almost all. Leadership structures, yes. Let me give you a good example of how that worked or did not work in present day memory. I was just down in Selma, because as you know, for those of you who read the book, that I was in Montgomery during the time of the Selma to Montgomery March, working with a group called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. So I was down there with some of my SNCC friends, and we kind of had a movement house, and everybody was happy to be with one another. And I went at one point the same day that the president was in town. I went over, I meant to bring it so that I could show it off. Got a medallion for being a foot soldier. Well, there were a lot of people who were foot soldiers that didn't get to see the president because there were so many cutoffs in terms of the limitations on the number of people who got to go to the good things. One of the problems with that is that sometimes people get impatient. So while the leaders, quote unquote, were talking to each other at Brown's Chapel, which was kind of one of the great iconic places in Selma movement history, Jesse Jackson and Reverend Sharpton and a whole lot of other people were just over there preaching and praying, and everybody was having a good time, but they were talking to each other. Out in the street, there were 40,000 people who wanted to go across the bridge. And so because the leaders didn't show up to lead, the people just started going across the bridge. And because it was a leaderless kind of action, nobody thought about how to get back. So everybody was going across the bridge, and the poor people who were going over the bridge couldn't get back. They finally got back by leaning against one of the rails on the bridge and squeezing their way. So without leadership, you don't have planning. You have a general set of directions, but you don't have rules. You don't have discipline. You don't have role playing. You don't have a real plan. You might have a goal that everybody agrees on, which was true in the Occupy movement, but you didn't have a plan for how to get there. You don't have a timetable, and so that's what's happening now. People have the fervor, they have the interest, and they have the ability. People your age have far more knowledge than people when I was growing up had at our disposal. But without leadership, and leadership doesn't necessarily mean one person at the top, although there was that too. The Martin Luther King, for example, there were still other people who had other leadership roles which helped formulate the structure. And I think structure is very important if you're going against structure. There's no greater structure in America than the police system. The system of policing in this country is very structured, very organized, very regulated with all those attributes that I just gave you. So you got to have something that can work for you to make that happen. I'm for leaders. I don't believe in non-leadership. When I came to Newark, that's what they said here with the SDS program. That we have no leaders. That was the motto that we had. And that was funny when somebody came up and said, well, who's your leader? And the police wouldn't come. You had a demonstration, the police come up and say, well, who's your leader? And folks would say, we have no leaders. Chuckle, 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 chuckle. But everybody knew that we had leadership. Tom Hayden was the leader. And then there was a hierarchy of folks on down. So it worked better because we had leadership.
Thank you.
Having a vanguard amongst community activists is a reaction to, say, the fear of a kind of Marxist-Leninist vanguard party. Because I spent much time down at the Occupy Wall Street movement, and it was so strange to come from a world of different spheres of politics where there's so much sectarianism and so much identity politics. I am me and I'm not thee. Yet no one, it was a vaporous, amorphous kind of atmosphere that no one wanted to classify themselves as anything. I'm not a feminist, I'm not a socialist humanist, I'm not the... And so I don't know if that is a historical rejection of past principles and traditions and actions, or it's just a strange kind of zeitgeist of 21st century America. I don't know.
Well, I think that's a little bit of all of the above. I found when I was here in Newark that the students, folks who were in college or had gone to college or finished college, we were called the students. And the folks who were from the neighborhood were called the people. Now, I was kind of different because I was black and had been a student, so I didn't have a type. I didn't have a category. I was certainly not considered to be a student. because I was black, but I certainly wasn't just from the neighborhood because I went to college. So I think a lot of that was the fact that people didn't want to admit that they had some skills that were useful. You know, it was kind of like, I'm educated, but I really don't want to show it because it would mean I have something going for myself that perhaps other people don't have. And that's what you went to college for. College, a friend of mine, Phil Hutchins, I said in the book, college gives you confidence. College gives you confidence. And if you got confidence, you should use it. I didn't have any problem using the confidence that I had. I spoke up when it was necessary, or I didn't if I didn't really know or thought I shouldn't. So if you're interested in becoming a part of a movement or forming a movement, use the confidence, use the skills that you have. Confidence is a skill. So people didn't want to really show that because they felt other folks didn't get it. Now, other folks who didn't go to college had to get confidence in other ways. And the other way you get confidence in the movement is to do what's necessary at that particular time. And you begin to see that you can win. You start with low-hanging fruit. You start, as Worth Long showed us in jail, in prison, in state prison, just the whole controversy over the blankets. You remember the parable of the blankets? How many of you remember that?
Yeah.
That was probably the most important discovery that I had. I'm going to read some of that for you because I think that's really the essence of what I learned when I was in the state prison with SNCC.
Junius, if you want to quiz my students on all the acronyms, they know them all extraordinarily well.
All right. That's good, I will. Because there were so many of us, the powers that be decided to move some of us to Kilby State Prison. I'm moving down a little bit. There were 150 to 200 of us transferred to Kilby State Prison. I'm moving down a little bit. This is on page 78. The psychological war began almost immediately. There were no beds, just mattresses on the floor with no sheets or blankets. The later it became, the colder it got. At some point in the early evening, some guards appeared and threw in some blankets. I had found a mattress away from the door and turned over to see a mad scramble for the few blankets they threw on the floor with dust flying all over the place. No way was I going to enter that fray, and so I resigned myself to being cold for the night. Then Worth Long took charge. Worth was a short man with glasses. He looked like a stereotypical political organizer from books by Kafka and Dostoevsky. I found out later that he had been with SNCC for some time and had been one of the field secretaries working in Selma and the communities in Lowndes County, Alabama. SNCC had a deeper involvement in Selma than did SCLC, despite the headlines for King in the March. We can talk about that in a little while if you want to. Worth got up on one of the tables in the holding pen and got everybody's attention by yelling louder than the combatants for blankets on the floor. Once most of us were listening, he began. I don't know about you, but if I was a man, I wouldn't take a blanket for myself unless there was a blanket for everybody. He paused and let that sink in. Then he said it again, establishing eye contact with everybody in the cell. As we without blankets waited, one by one, those who had scrambled for the prize came up and threw their blanket into a pile. The pile grew, and the guards who'd been standing outside the locked gate to watch the niggas fighting each other over blankets had to take a second look at the new black men that emerged from that struggle. One of the things they do to us is to make us fight among ourselves, Worth explained. If they can't get blankets for all of us, then we all ought to sleep cold. Yeah, was the reply, as we all bought into what Worth was doing. In less than 5 minutes, Worth had organized the cell. He turned a pack of individuals who were following their individual instincts for survival into a group of men who were willing to stick together. The rednecks at the cell door caught on to it, and after trying to tell us these were all the blankets they had and seeing our response, They went somewhere and got some more blankets. Everybody in both cells slept with a blanket that night. All I could do was look at Worth and say to myself, wow. Worth had defined the terms of the confrontation and showed us how to win an immediate victory. From that point on, we were a unit and not just a bunch of stragglers thrown into a cell together. You see, Worth Long had skills. He had confidence, but he had organizational skills, and he used that low-hanging fruit, which was the fight over the blankets, to organize folks. So that's one of the things you do if you have confidence. That's one of the things you do if you know how to organize. So that's something that people should step up and do. I think the racial issue was also a factor in what happened here in Newark. The people who went to college, with the exception of me and Phil Hutchings, were all white. And the whites didn't want to show that they had skills and had come from a situation where there were some skills that were possibly helpful in a particular situation like that. So they held back. That's the reason why a lot of people, I think, don't want to show leadership and don't want other people to be leaders, because it's somehow anti-democratic. We ought to all stew in the same predicament together without somebody trying to figure out a way. Because that's what leadership is. I took a long time to answer that.
No, it's great. This is technically a literature seminar, and I'm all about praxis. I'm also about process and writing process. And you offered in the book some snippets about, writing across decades, little bits of this. But what was the experience like to codify consciousness into history, to actually take a retrospective glance at your activities, the life of the city, the life of your sisters and brothers in various struggles, and actually begin to cultivate a subjective voice to frame all of that experience and all the disparate experiences that you had to all of a sudden put into a kind of structure that is both linear but also oblique at times as need be?
Well, that's a good question. Nobody asked me that before. A lot of things come to mind. First of all, a friend of mine who was somewhat of my muse told me that I needed to have a voice. I needed to establish my voice in the book so that it wouldn't just be a run-on kind of history. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and on and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you're sitting there, oh my God, I got to remember all of these facts because I'm gonna have a quiz tomorrow. I didn't want that kind of book. I wanted a book that reflected who I am as a person. So that means I wasn't strictly a historian, but yet I was telling history. So I had to detach myself at points from what was happening, because I had to realize at some point that I was making this history. This just wasn't something distant from me. I wasn't a reporter. I wasn't standing over here looking this way. I was actually down in the valley. I was doing the thing. I was all involved, wrapped up in everything that was happening. Sometimes I was a little bit distant from certain fights in Newark that I didn't have anything to do with or didn't have much to do with, and so I wrote about that, and that was easier. But you're right, you have to detach yourself at certain points. If you're going to write this kind of book, a historical memoir is very difficult to write in that perspective, from that perspective, because you do have to accept that you are looking at yourself. And so I tried to make the judgment. I tried to make the judgment call about whether I was doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And hindsight helped me decide that. For example, I looked at when I ran for mayor. I ran for mayor based upon the fact that I just didn't want to sit there and be a councilman. I didn't feel like doing that. And that was kind of egotistical, but I realized that being a councilman, I wasn't going to get the punch that I needed to have at the beginning of the era of Reaganomics. Because I wanted to do the things that were necessary in the community to make people rise up and fight that. And maybe use Newark as a place where we could start the struggle against Reaganomics. And I couldn't do that on the council. One of 9. Looking back at it, had I really wanted to be mayor, I probably should have started as a councilman. And then I'd have built that base and then parlayed it up but then I would have had to raise the money to do the things you do when you raise money, and I realized that I wasn't that person. So I kind of, it was a mistake from one standpoint. It was not a mistake from another, because that's just not who I was. So I accepted the fact that I had to do something different, and I wrote about it.
And did you write about it, can I ask you, with the kind of developmental logic? Let me hit the 60s first. Let me go to Ken Gibson's mayoral fight. Or did you tend to have a kind of constellation of chapters and sections raring to go that you know, at your choosing?
Mm-hmm. No, I didn't do it the first way. I didn't do it logically. I did it as it hit me. Certain things came to me, as I pointed out in the front of the book. I might get an idea in church, and so I start writing down on the church bulletin. So if I'm in a restaurant, I start writing on the napkin, and then I'd keep that major thought until I got back to my womb, which was my office, which was my dining room table in my house, and I just started writing, and it just poured out. The other thing that helped me was the notes I was taking all along, and I didn't realize I was really taking such copious notes when I started taking notes. So I found things that I had written about, which was my then perception of what was real, and I could compare it with what I thought now when I was writing the book, and that was very helpful to do that give and take. And finally, I did interviews. I did interviews with people starting back in 1989, before most of you were born. I wrote, I took notes from listening to people who were quote unquote here or there, and their perspective was very important for me to juxtapose their perspective against my perspective, both then and now. And so then I put all of that together, and out came the words to express how I felt at that time.
I didn't know what your thoughts were about the protests going on in Ferguson and around the country. We spoke about the codifying movement and how they're leaderless, but with the Ferguson protests, it was like it's not just in Ferguson; it's all around the country. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts were about that.
She wants to know what I thought about the protest in Ferguson. I think the energy was great. I think that some of the tactics were persistent and consistent, and it kept the spotlight on Ferguson. What I thought they should have done was to take it a step further, because at a certain point, their every move was anticipated. Everything they were going to do, even if they didn't have spies within the group, which they probably did, everything they were going to do was broadcast, and it was like putting it up on a billboard. I'm coming out today, and we're going to have another demonstration, and we're going to have 500 folks. You can't win like that. You got to do something different. You got to step up your game, so to speak. That place was ripe for a boycott. Christmas time. Don't buy. Just don't buy the food. Don't buy the clothes. It was close enough to somewhere else. Go somewhere else and buy what you want to buy for Christmas. Remember what happened in Montgomery in 1955? The bus boycott. Remember the bus boycott? When Rosa Parks sat down and Rosa Parks refused to get up. Well, a lot of people think that was just an individual action, but no, that was a planned action. Rosa Parks was the chosen person, because there had been other people who sat down before, but they presented what was thought to be an indefensible position at that time. So in the end, the boycott was so punishing because it withdrew participation from the bus companies. And the bus companies were saying, oh my God, you got to stop these black folks from walking around. They walked for a year, almost a year, or maybe just over a year. And they brought the city to its knees. And it wasn't because they were having the mass meetings. It wasn't because they were having the sit-ins. It wasn't because they were having great big demonstrations. It was because they refused to participate in evil. That's the second aspect of it that was very important. There was a high moral tone to everything that they did. High moral tone. Don't let them take the morality away from you. Now the TV can do that if you depend upon the TV. But amongst the community, if you are you know you're right, you gotta make sure you control the language and the perception of your own struggle. And I think they did that in Montgomery with the mass meetings and with the singing and with the church aspect. But in Ferguson, it was touch and go sometimes. Because the TV was gonna focus on who they wanted to focus on. And if somebody looked rowdy, they were gonna pick that up. But if you staying home and you're not buying for Christmas, and you going to the next town or even to St. Louis to buy your clothes, your toys, whatever you buy, that thing would have ended much quicker. The people who are just now resigning, they would have been gone. Because that would have been what you said. Indictment, also get rid of these people. Because there was a whole history, as the federal government intervention has shown, there's a whole history of collusion between the police and the courts there to use the black population to pay for the expenses of the town because they gave everybody tickets. Not only there, but throughout the county. In one city, in one county, I think 80% of the funding that comes for the town came from tickets they got from people on the highway. And who were those people that they ticketed? Black people. So not only should there be a withdrawal of enthusiasm from Ferguson, there should be a withdrawal from all the damn towns around there. Go somewhere else and do your shopping. But they never took that next step up. And I think that's what's necessary. If you young people are going to do the kinds of struggles that we were involved in, you have to think about, well, what's the next phase? What's the next step? What can I do? So, because if you don't have a demonstration with 1,000 people in it, you're not going to be noticed. They had the manpower and woman power down there, so they were noticed, but the impact was not as much as it should have been, could have been. That young man has his hand up.
Oh, yes, how you doing? It's good to see you in the flesh, Mr. Williams.
Yes, sir.
My name is Rebecca Sylvain, and I think one thing in the book that I noticed was how little Martin Luther King was mentioned. So in context of leadership, do you think some leaders take too much of the limelight away from the movement? Like, for example, Reverend Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson. Do you feel that they take so much of where we focus more on their characters rather than the movement itself? Or do you think Martin Luther King did the same thing back in the day?
I'm going to give you a test question though. Why do you think I didn't mention Martin Luther King so much? What was the trigger for that? What was the impetus for me not mentioning him so much?
I read that he was disappointed because in a way when Martin Luther King showed up to Montgomery, all the hostility went away. And when he went away, it came back. So in a way, you don't see the reality. You don't see how the oppressive forces really are when the leadership in the spotlight shows up. Is that close to the answer? Is that correct?
That man should get a B+. B+. To that answer. Now that was true, because when Martin Luther King showed up, he did try to take away the energy. He didn't succeed. He tried to do as you say, but this was a SNCC crowd, and we just weren't going to let that happen. So people just talked bad about him while he was there. Later on, just for those of you who didn't read the book, you should have read this part. I realized that I should have forgiven him that foolish tactic because he had progressed and was quite an articulate spokesman for another level of struggle which involved class as opposed to just race. See, when Martin Luther King died, he had written a book, and in it he said, we need to have a guaranteed minimum income. Now, what does that mean? A guaranteed minimum income. What would you compare that with in your study of world economies, political economies? Anybody have an answer? What country would, at that particular time, would you compare that statement with? Let's try it another way. Who also might have said that in your readings of other countries and the political economy in them? Karl Marx. Get that man an A. Karl Marx. Karl Marx was saying that was socialism. To each according to his need. It's part of what is in the Communist Manifesto. So he wasn't a communist, but he believed that the American economy had to accommodate people who were poor, and the best way to do that was to make sure people had a guaranteed income. And guess what? Y'all supposed to say what?
What?
I'm gonna try it again. Guess what?
What?
People were listening to him. And that's why he was killed. People were listening to him because it made eminent good sense. The movement had progressed, and the whole aspect of the urban problem, which was poverty, and he had built this tent city down in Washington, and people were coming to the tent city. Some of my folks went down there to stay. I didn't go to stay, but I went down to visit. And then you had people scrambling around Congress, like Senator Hubert Humphrey, and they put together something called the Humphrey-Hawkins Full Employment Bill. It was never funded because Martin Luther King got killed, so the pressure went away. But that was intention. That's what they wanted to happen. Because people no longer concerned themselves with the fact that there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of people without jobs, and the only way you're going to get jobs is not through the trickle-down effect of what the companies were willing to give, or what was produced as a result of manufacturing and service jobs. But the government was going to have to create those jobs for people to get where they needed to be. So they shot him themselves. I have a group at Rutgers called the Abbott Leadership Institute Youth Media Symposium. And what I say to kids, it's going on for the last 6-7 months, I say you have a voice. And your voice can be empowered if you learn the skills associated with the media, such as videography, photography, learn how to tell your story, learn how to tell other stories, learn how to do advocacy with your voice. We teach them public speaking. We teach them how to negotiate with adults, other people in power, so that they learn some skills that they can take with them. Now, a byproduct of that in learning how to do all of those things is confidence. Remember I told you about confidence. They're not in college yet, but they got some confidence. Because I got kids, we step them out there, we put them out there. You know, they go to young shy young lady who went to Central High School here. No, she went to Shabazz. And she came in just before the Board of Education meeting. She had her little speech and it was a little off. So I helped her with some of her statistics and putting things together. And then she went down there and spoke to this group of 1,000 folks who were mad with what Cammie Anderson was doing to the school district, most of whom were parents and community activists. And she got up there and took that stand and she said, well, and I'm a bulldog from Shabazz and I'm going to be here to fight wherever I go. The whole crowd erupted, stood up, gave her a standing ovation. And she wasn't the same since. She got confidence. Confidence means you can do more things. So I need you to help me with some of those students. There are some times if you want to come over and volunteer in some of our programs, that would be great. First of all, your role models. That's one of the things we've been able to do. College is not a part of the culture in Newark. Only 17% of the people in Newark have ever gone to college. And you say wherever you come from, that's amazing. I see some folks from other countries. That's even amazing from some countries that America dares to call third world. That isn't happening in some places. So if you come and talk to my students, that would be great. One activity that can happen. We had one of the things they were able to do, and the other thing they learned to do is critical thinking. Well, what is it that we really need to have? Well, one of the things they have is a 5-point program called College Access, College Readiness. And one of the 5 points is to have have 10 college success centers around town to help the kids learn how to get into college. They call it college knowledge, because they're not getting it in school. Nowadays, you have schools that don't even have full-time counselors, much less counselors that have 400 and 500 people to take care of. So they're not learning. So we have now come up with college success centers. I need you to help with those college success centers. If you want to do that, maybe you can get some names, because you can come in and volunteer to help them go through the college process, just like you had to learn how to do it. In some cases, we want you to inspire them to want to go to college. I got one center in the South Ward where we're going to be talking to 7th and 8th graders. Well, we're not going to be doing one-on-one counseling with them, but we want to make sure that when they get to the 9th through the 12th grade, they get ready for college and they see college as part of their lifestyle, as part of a future. Just went to the YMCA. They're going to have, I'm going to have access to some young men who have been adjudicated by the judge to, and this is an alternative program for them. If you don't go to this program at the YMCA, you're going to jail for whatever it is you did. You've been found guilty. Now you got to do this in your last chance, or you're going to jail. So I'm going to be talking to some folks who need some real talking to, because they never thought about college. So more than filling out forms there, we're going to have to step up their game to turn the corner to find another way to do some things. So there's all those, if you're interested in doing something like that, that's what you can do.
Daniel, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I was in the book. There's a big part that you talk about where you were fighting the city for the medical school. Where do you think Newark would be today if you had lost that fight?
Wow. Well, you know where the medical school is, right?
Yeah.
Up there. The medical school would have gone all the way from Central Avenue all the way over to Springfield Avenue, as opposed to Central Avenue to South Orange Avenue. It would have gone all the way up to, I believe, I don't remember the boundaries, probably up to 17th, 18th Street, all the way down. They wouldn't be taking you guys, but just where over there where the border is between NJIT and that street that crosses there, that would have been the medical school. They'd have had a golf course as opposed to a school. That's number one. Number two, there wouldn't have been any sufficient number of minorities working on that construction. See, we had a construction, we set up something called the Newark Construction Trades Training Program, which trained about 600 young, mostly black, some Latino males. Women weren't in construction at that particular time. Nobody thought that was necessary, so don't blame me. That was just not assumed that women were going to do that. This is in 1968, y'all. So as a result of the success in getting placement for those folks who were trained here, despite some of the contractors' objectives, and despite some of the union's objectives, some of these guys got union books, and they were the core group of black, mostly black, and some Puerto Rican workers who worked on all these public projects throughout Essex County and over into some of the Passaic County, because it went over to the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission activities, and all over northern part of New Jersey, these guys got jobs. Finally, the medical school would not have had as many black employees inside once the school had been built. Although most of the jobs are still at the bottom, there would have been far fewer people employed, and we would not have been able to build the housing that we did. See, we took back some of the land for housing. We said, you can have 60 acres, but we're going to get 60 acres of land for housing. We want 60 acres of vacant urban renewal land. Now, why that? Because we didn't want to have to relocate people, and we wanted the land to be cheap. Urban renewal land is cheap. You get that for $1 a square foot. So we got land. If you look around here, up the hill here, there's a place called Tosalt. It was called, I can't think of the name of it, Georgia King Village. Anybody know where that is? Where the fast food restaurant is, and where West Market kind of snakes around, and there's a big project at Georgia King Village, low rise, high rise. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then you go around to Bergen Street, and again on West Market, or is it on West? No, I'm sorry, am I getting that direction straight? West Market, and come around over to I don't know the cross street. Across from Science High School. There's another project there. That's New Hope Village. That wouldn't have been there. There's probably, I forget the exact number of units that we were able to impact and fund, but we built more than 1,000 units of housing because of that. A lot of it low, well, all of it was low income, but a lot of it was large. There were multiple bedrooms, 4 and 5 bedrooms. You don't find people building 4 and 5 bedrooms anymore, because those were the people that were the hardest to relocate, and they're still there. What, 1960? We finished those in about 1970 up until now. How many years is that? That housing is still there. And we planned it, you architects will consider this, when you build high-rise housing, you don't want to put people who have large families in the high-rise units, because you got little kids, and little kids ride up and down the elevators all day long. They pushing the button, going up and down the elevator. Wear and tear on the elevators. Plus, parents can't find out what the kids are doing. They don't know what they're doing. So we put the large families on the low levels. If you go up there to see, those two projects are consistent with it. Those are the rules we gave our sponsors. You have to build low-rise housing for large families, and if you and the point towers that we had, and it only went up to 8 stories, those will be a maximum of 2-bedroom units, maybe 3. But you couldn't have large families in those units, and we wanted to make sure that the folks who had the big families were closer to the ground. So none of that would have happened if we hadn't been successful with what we did.
This kind of goes in with the question that you asked and the question that you just asked a little bit. You said that in order to impact the kids and make the students, or kids in the city want to make a difference or go to college, you need to speak with them. But as I was a high school in Newark as well. I was raised in Newark, and
Where'd you go?
American history, like right across the street.
Oh yeah.
It's not with the kids, it's usually with their parents. And seeing, if my grandmother lived in this project or this building for this long, my family been in the city for 3-4 generations, I could do it too. And, if they didn't go to school, they're fine. How can you, almost like, how can you expect, you might impact a small group of kids, but how can you get the mass to understand that, college is an important step. It's not the only way, but it is, a very important way to, make it out, and that you can do better, and that there is better than just staying in the city.
Mm-hmm. She wants to know, how can we get the masses of people to include college going as a part of the culture? Well, you start with what you can. And I mean, we've had, through the 6 years or 7 years that we've been involved with young people, we haven't had very much money. We usually deal with 25, 30 kids. And I would say that most of the kids who have gone through our program went to college. I would say 75 to 80% of those kids went to college. Some of them didn't stay in college because of the money or other factors, family situation, and somebody had to go take care of the mother and stuff like that. But we didn't take a poll, but I would say that half of those students would not have gone to college if we had not touched them in some way. So that's pretty good for a small program, which is now situated in urban education at Rutgers. So what are the ingredients for growing your own, so to speak? Well, we're in a college environment. We've got people who've been to college and graduate school as role models, which is something they didn't have before. The role model used to be the drug dealer, you know, or the hustler, or the pimp, or somebody. Now we have things that are competing with what they have learned from the street. You know what I'm talking about. So, and we get the parents involved because the parents see what the students have achieved because they come to special events. The end of the year, we have special events, and you can see the parents are beaming, you know, and they come up and say, wow, thank you for what you've done for my child. I didn't know this was possible. So you've touched a whole lot of people besides just the individuals. And that's how you grow a movement. You have to plant great expectations in people. And there's no way to gauge how that's going to go, how far that will go. What we have done is to up the ante. We used to just do it for 25 or 30, but if we have 10 success centers in Newark, and we expected 30 kids a month to come through it, you do the math. You see how that will grow exponentially? And then when you add in the parents of those kids, because we're going to stage activities to get the parents involved, they have to be involved if you want to go to college. Because they got to fill out the FAFSA form or give the information so that you can fill out the FAFSA and all that. The parents are going to have to accept the fact, well, hey, just maybe my kid will beat the odds and go to college, and I can help them. So again, you added another layer. So this is a big thing. This is no little thing. We have that 17%. The objective is to bring the number of college folks in Newark by the end of, I think, 2016 as a group of folks. We're trying to bring it up to 25%. Well, we the hub of that. We the hub of that. 10 college success centers, 30 kids a month, getting some aspect of college knowledge, some aspect of college preparation, and some interaction with the parents of those children. That's a whole lot of people.
Question to that, and with what Marshall said would be, what happens to the students that their parents are not involved?
What happens?
But still want to have that opportunity. Then my second question would be, are there scholarship funds for Newark students available in your programs?
Well, not just for us, but I mean the general scholarship opportunities that are available for all of you in here. To answer to your second question, we haven't established any special fund for that, although there is a group that has come to town which says they want to give scholarships to kids, and we're going to connect with them. I forget the name of that group. Students whose parents don't cooperate, don't see the light, we have to become their parents. We have to become their parents. We have to take on that responsibility. We have to become big brothers, big sisters, you know, grandmother, grandfather, father, mother, whatever has to happen. We have to lead them. We have to guide them through those obstacles. Young lady who was in the program, and she's very bright. She wants to go to college. Just came to us as a senior. Was trying to get it all together, but mother wouldn't sign the, wouldn't give the financial aid information, wouldn't give the information so that they could get the financial aid. So I took her over to see one of the people in the EOF program, and the lady said, well, have your mother call me. So she got her mother to call. And the lady in the EOF program was very persuasive. We got the mother to cooperate. So we had a great big turnaround. So now XYZ is going to be able to go to college, either Rutgers or somewhere else. And she's one of those newfound stars that we had. I heard her yesterday talking about these centers. And man, can she talk. Could she talk when she got there? No, had no self-confidence. But now, rising to the top.
Anybody else? Well, oh, yes, Sandra.
One other question. The young lady made a good point. She said, how do we empower the students, get them to college, so they can get out of the city? But then what's left in the city is uneducated. How do we get them to come back and be a part of the community and actually be in the community?
Well, I didn't hear her say that, or I would have taken her on. Yeah, I don't want folks to just leave the city. I want people to be empowered so they can make the city better. Because wherever you go, it's going to be the same. Unless you're going to find some island or somewhere and you go in by yourself and that's where you're going to live, you're always going to find problems. So you might as well stay here and fight these. The whole idea is to learn how to fight and to fight together. That's what my book is all about. It is a roadmap. It's a blueprint for how to organize. It's also a statement about why you need to organize, why you need to be continually organized. Because if you don't, if you wait, then somebody else is going to fill that vacuum. And that's what happened in the whole, with the whole movement, the civil rights movement, into the Black Power movement. We did not, we took it for granted that we were free. And then people just recycled and reconfigured and came at us in a different way. And we didn't know how to deal with that because we forgot the bridge that brought us over, which was community organization, which was the ability to fight using confrontational politics when necessary, which was having a reliance upon ourselves and creating the kinds of organizational presence that was necessary to maintain what you had so you can go and get some more. That was my big complaint when I was in City Hall. You know, I was mad because I helped create the then mayor, the first black mayor, and he wouldn't let me do what I could do best, which was to organize so that we could go further and get what was necessary to take Newark to the next level. That's what we have to do.